Okay.
Today's topic, forest sustainability. We value our forests for a lot of different reasons: for fish and wildlife habitat, for recreation, and for jobs and forest products. Making sure our forests can provide all of these values in the long term is what we call forest sustainability. When something is sustainable, it means it provides what we need today as well as far into the future. And what forests provide are of great importance to all of us: clean water and wildlife habitat, safe recreational access, and a reliable wood supply for the wood and paper products we use every day. For our forests to be truly sustainable, they have to support all of these needs. In other words, they need to support our environmental, social, and economic needs. You might ask, now hold on there. Some federal forests provide almost no wood products, and some private forests don't allow public access. Does that mean they're not sustainable? Most folks believe to determine forest sustainability, you have to look at all the forests in a given area, such as an entire state, the country, or the world, and not just 1 acre or even just one forest. Scientific research and responsible forest management are working together to help determine optimal forest sustainability.
Oh, yeah.
Which means the next generation, and hopefully all future generations, will have forests for clean drinking water, recreation, forest products, and more. And that's the story on forest sustainability. Check out more Forest Fast Breaks at texasforestinfo.com.
So to recap a little bit, it's our role and our positions. And as you all get older, or even now, you all go out and do community service work or work with professionals, but it's our task now, working in groups, scientists, professionals, kids, teens, adults, whoever. It's their responsibility to try to put in that extra effort to understand what we need as forests, not just on a smaller scale, but on a larger global scale too. We all have to work as a team to get this machine rolling properly. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual management of a forest.
Today's topic, forest management. Our forests come in all shapes and sizes, large and small, young and old. In most forests around the country, chances are that forest management is taking place in one form or another. But what does that actually mean? What is forest management? Think of a forest as a complex system. All the parts need to work together, and someone is in charge of making them work to reach a certain goal. That someone is a forest manager.
Hello.
Now, forests are managed for different goals. Some can be managed primarily for the wood products we use every day. Others as wilderness areas and for wildlife habitat or watershed protection. Still others are managed for recreational values. But today, most forests have a mix of these goals. Forest managers figure out what needs to happen to reach those goals. Could be planting and growing trees. Could be thinning or harvesting trees. Could be altering the habitat to favor one species over another, or simply protecting areas to minimize human impact. Regardless of what they're managed for, there are plenty of environmental, social, and economic benefits that come from all types of managed forests. Forest management ensures that our forests stay healthy, productive, and sustainable for a long, long time. And that's the story on forest management. Check out more Forest Facts.
So once again, and we're talking about those different, the social aspects, the economic aspects, and the wildlife aspect. And if we would break those down, and we're looking at a forest as a whole, but what if we broke it down and we looked at individual trees? And we looked at what that main tree is providing us. If it's providing us a food resource, if it's providing us shelter or enjoyment aesthetically on a hike or an adventure, or if it's more of an industry aspect where these are the material that we're going to use to build our homes. They're all important, but we need a way to look at each tree and tell how healthy it has been in history or through time. And one of the ways that we do that is through a tree cookie. Does anyone know what a tree cookie is? It's not something you eat. So a tree cookie is actually a segment of a tree. So if we cut down a tree and we have a stump left, that stump has rings and information. Well, we can look and break that down into a system where we can see kind of what's been going on. So I'm going to show you all an example of a tree cookie and kind of the things that we can see within it. So I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, hold on one moment. I have the
large tree cookie. It's about the size of
start that over for you.
right, campers. So to break down a little bit, our tree cookie. First of all, we have a very large tree cookie. It's about the size of
Hey, Eli, can you mute? Please
once
stay.
again at the pith. The pith is the area that was once a seed, right? So that's where this tree originally was either planted or was seeded through wildlife or weather or whatever the sources are.
So take a moment and think. If you looked out in the forest, whether it's right next door or a park that you visited, a large forest or grassland, think that every single one of those trees, rather there's hundreds of them, they all started from one small source.
We can see each of these rings down through, right? And then we can see this little rough section in here. So we see a rough area and then a smooth and a rough and a smooth. So each of this is the breakdown of the seasons. So we can see that there was a winter and a summer and a winter and a summer. Let's discuss that for a moment.
So can everybody see those differences in the growth rings? So, but we can see this really rough ring that goes all the way around. That's just in the winter. So in the winter months, what do? We kind of curl up, we tighten up, we get under a blanket, and we don't like to move a whole lot in the winter. Well, a tree is the same way, and it kind of closes off its system, and its growth is much more compacted. But in the summertime, what do? We kind of branch out, we move around more, we kind of start moving and growing a little bit faster, right? That's the same way that a tree is doing. So we can see where it's smoother is actually where it grew much faster. We can see the distance between a winter and a summer. Summer is much longer than that short winter, right? Because it grew more in the summertime.
So now that we know that there's different seasons in a year, then we would spend the time to actually count our rings. So first we have our pith, and then we have the first major growth. So see the distance of growth. That's pretty large. So it grows faster when it's a kid, just like we do as people. So there's 1, 2, 3, and we keep counting. Remember, we're not just counting 2 rings there, 1, 2, 3. We're counting 1 full year of seasons. So that would be from winter to summer. So we'd have 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth till we get all the rings counted for this individual tree. How old do you think this tree is?
Y'all have a guess? And Debbie, you can participate as well.
Maybe like 80 or 90 years old.
80 or 90. Okay, anyone else?
I said 6 in the chat, so I'm probably way off.
So this tree particular is about 50 years old. Now, something else that we also do when we get done counting the rings, this one particular is a white pine, but we can add an extra 3 years from the time that it became a seed till it grew to be enough of a sapling to start producing those well-defined rings, okay? So it could have been more like 47 rings we counted, but we're gonna call it a 50-year-old tree. Now this grew much, much faster than other species do. But it's real important that we're focusing on our management on what type of tree that we have growing. If this would have been an oak at the same size, it would have took 200 years of management to get it to this point versus the 50 years for this particular tree that was managed properly.
So after counting all of the rings and making sure that we add a couple years for when it was coming out of seed, then we can see other structures of the tree, including the change in color. So we can see that there's a ring here that's a little bit different in color. It's a little bit darker back this way and a little bit lighter this way. So everything from the center, I'll hold my hand here, from here to the center is heartwood. Heartwood keeps the structure of a tree and holds it completely up.
If we're thinking of our own body and we think about where and what's in the center of our chest, of course, is our heart, right? And also we think about what gives us structure and allows us to remain standing. It's our skeleton, right? So what we're looking at there, we're looking at the heartwood, the center of our body, and we're looking at the skeletal system, kind of what keeps our structure up, which is not necessarily living. All of our other parts of our body are the parts that are keeping us functioning. But the skeletal system keeps us with structure, and that's the same for the heartwood.
From here on to the edge, what we see is referred to as sapwood, where a lot of that water is flowing through the tree.
And we're talking about water flowing through the tree and through a system. If we're looking at our own body and our own mechanics, we're talking about our vascular system and how our blood travels through our veins.
So from here back to the center is actually already dead wood. We consider between here with the sapwood and a few other layers, we consider that to be the living part of the tree that holds a little bit better. So this can decay over time with disease and different things, and as it ages, this will usually hold strong. Other parts of the tree that we can see very easily would be the bark. Bark holds structure to the outside, protects it from the elements. Here you can see quite thick bark, and you can see different layers within the bark. These are different layers as it's forming, trying to protect the tree. But we can see it separates itself, right? And that separation underneath would separate from the inner bark. What do you think is next from the inner bark? Next, we have something referred to as the phloem. Phloem allows water to trickle back down from the top into the root systems. Then we have the cambium layer, followed by, once again, the sapwood, followed by the heartwood.
Okay, so that's a breakdown a little bit of a tree cookie when we look at it. So not only could we see how old it was, but we could tell if we wanted to count back in the years, we could know what date maybe that tree was planted or seeded, as well as we could see maybe times of drought or times of great rain events causing more growth or less growth, right? We could also see diseases or wildfires or insect damage, so on and so forth, and we kind of get a living history of that tree. And just like we could look at our own age, if you have a 10-year-old, right, individual human, well, they would only have 10 rings to them, right? But we could maybe see some of the things that happen through their lifetime. And it's the same for a tree. So this is a 50-year-old tree, and it had different events happen in its life. But to break down some of those structures that happen, and some of those key terms that I had, I want to show you a little video. It's a little bit more interactive, might make it a little bit more clearer for you. Take a moment and share my screen again.
So the trees, they grow like because they start out like tiny, they grow outwards, right? Like that's how the rings they go outwards.
That is correct. So from the inside, it's not growing from the inside anymore. It's really only growing from the outside and creating more cells every time.
Okay.
And let me know if y'all can hear this, Debbie.
First Fast Break, brought to you by the Idaho Forest Products Commission. Today's topic, tree biology. Trees, like all plants, need sunlight to grow, along with water and nutrients. They use the sunlight to make their own food through photosynthesis. For this process, the tree takes in carbon dioxide.
Now, you probably know the basic parts.
It's also known as the inner bark. It transports sap and sugars from the needles and leaves to nourish the rest of the tree. Next comes the cambium. This is the growing part of the trunk. On one side, it creates new wood cells, and on the other, it creates new bark. Under the cambium is the xylem. Xylem is another name for wood. The outer layer of wood is called sapwood. Sapwood is like the superhighway of water and nutrients from the roots to the rest of the tree. Finally, the inner layer of the xylem is the heartwood. This is the part that gives a tree its rigid structure. Although this wood is technically dead, the tree would have a hard time surviving without it. As long as we're looking inside the tree, take a look at a cross-section of a tree. We all know you can tell a tree's age by counting its rings. But why do trees have rings? At certain times of year, when sunlight and water are abundant, trees grow quickly, adding big new wood cells. But at other times, the tree's growth slows and it adds fewer and smaller cells. The combination of big cells next to small cells gives the wood the impression of a ring, signifying 1 year of growth. So the rings really show you when the tree was growing quickly and when it was taking it easy. And that's a quick look at tree biology. Check out more Forest Fast Breaks. Visit.
So I hope that maybe made that a little bit more clear.
I do have a question about how it grows. So when, like, so because the tree goes outward, like, is it like pushing the bark outward and filling in those spots, or is it like just completely covering the old like outer bark?
So remember on that one viewpoint, it had cells going in one direction and cells going into the other. So it's creating new wood and getting bigger as it goes. And then it's creating new bark. But in a lot of cases, the bark gets rubbed off or kind of rubs over time. So it's always gaining some new bark, but it might keep some old. But it's building that up much slower than it's building up the cells for new wood.
So it's like pushing it out, like the bark outwards.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, so next thing I have. So I want to kind of go over some of the science of what is happening inside of a tree, right? So I'm going to take a minute. I want us to take a great big huge breath. You can do it with me. So a great big breath in. A breath out, because our next subject is going to be a little bit about air and breathing. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to show you a few more fast break videos. Possibly. Let me stop sharing for a moment. But yeah, so foresters have to consider all of these different elements and how a tree is growing. If a tree is showing that it's got less growth, then that means that we need to be doing some kind of management to make it a little better. Okay, so I got my video working. So I'm going to share screen.
Do you use a car, turn on the lights, or use a microwave? Here's a simple one. Do you breathe? Most of us do. Doing ordinary things every day creates loads of carbon dioxide, otherwise known as CO2. In small batches, it isn't that big of a deal. But together, all that carbon dioxide is accumulating in our atmosphere, trapping in heat and radiation, and contributing to global climate change. And the level of carbon dioxide we create is rising every single year. Is there anything that can help?
Forests to the rescue!
Forests absorb carbon dioxide from the air like a giant sponge. And what's great is that trees hold on to the carbon for a really, really long time. People who like science call this carbon sequestration. Trees not only capture the carbon, they keep it. The trees and plants use carbon to grow bigger and stronger, releasing oxygen in the process. Even after a tree is made into things, like houses, furniture, or even skateboards, the wood holds onto that carbon as long as it's still wood. In fact, a 2x4 can be up to 50% carbon. Pretty cool. So how can we help forests to help the atmosphere? First, we need to keep forest land as forests. Once a forest becomes a parking lot, its superpowers are gone. Second, we need to plant and grow all the forests we can. Replanting after harvest, or even planting a forest where there wasn't one, helps out big time. And finally, choose wood products for buildings and furniture. Wood is renewable and requires less water and energy, and way less fossil fuels to manufacture than steel, plastic, or concrete. And wood products store carbon for the rest of their useful lives. And that's the story on carbon capture. Check out.
So when we talk about deforestation, which we hear a lot, a clear cut is not necessarily deforestation because it can grow back, we can replant, or it'll grow back naturally into a forest over time. But it's whenever we create a large concrete area, a large paved parking lot, or a road, that is deforestation because it does not come back naturally into a forested state. So as long as we're doing things sustainable to make sure we're promoting more forest and more healthy forests, then we're going to have forests to come for the next generation. And our forest is helping us off-put certain things like the natural carbon that we're putting out there. And it's helping us get everything to levels where everything's sustainable in our lives. Okay, so now we're going to move on to photosynthesis.
Today's topic? Photosynthesis. Do you like to breathe? Sure, we all do. We need oxygen to breathe, and we also need something to absorb the carbon dioxide that we exhale. Fortunately, a large portion of our oxygen comes from our forests. So how do trees give us oxygen? It's called photosynthesis, and it works like this. Trees absorb water through their roots and carry it to their leaves and needles. At the same time, tiny holes in the leaves and needles absorb carbon dioxide from the air. The water and the carbon dioxide collect in little cell globs called chloroplasts that contain chlorophyll. It's the stuff that gives plants their green color. Chlorophyll uses sunlight as fuel to transform carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and sugar. The trees use the sugars to grow bigger and stronger, storing carbon in the process as wood, and release the oxygen back into the atmosphere for us to breathe. And they do it day in and day out for their entire lives. Whew! Thanks, trees. And that's the story on photosynthesis. Check out more.
So when we're talking about the transfer of material and nutrients from the root system going up and through the tree and different parts of the plant, this can get a little bit complicated as it turns everything into sugars and transporting it out and going through the leaves. The two main parts that travel and transport material and nutrients are the phloem and xylem, which are tube-like structures. To make this a little bit easier to understand, I got two videos. to try to help you out. So we're going to start with xylem. So if we remember back in our tree cookie, we started from a seed to heartwood. Now we're in the area of the xylem. So what this is, remember, this is the part of the tree that is sucking water and nutrients from the root system up into the crown of the tree. It's got to get there somehow, right? So this is a little or a little thing you can do at home to kind of see how it works. Can you see it all right now? Okay.
Yes.
So here I can see a normal standard bottle of water. I also have a tube, being a turkey baster, right, that we can use as a mechanic type tool to say that water goes up in a suction like form and keeps going up as it's being pulled. So whenever I stick a tube of some sort down into water and I apply a certain amount of suction, you can see air releasing from our tube. So then we have no air inside, but only empty space, creating a vacuum. This vacuum can then draw water up. This is the same way that a tree would draw water up through the xylem from the root system and up into the trunk or the branches and leaves and through the trunk of the tree.
Okay, so that's a little example of how xylem works. But on the other side of the fence, we can talk about phloem, which is also tube-like, but works in a different way.
So in the way that xylem sucks water back up like a vacuum, a phloem is slightly different. So we have a tube here, which could be representative in both the xylem or the phloem. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to plug the end, not allowing any water or any air to escape. And if we would pick that up, we could actually see an area with water still in the tube. Now, if I would let go of the top of that, allowing gravity to take place and not having a vacuum, the water would flow out of the tube. This is how phloem works.
So what we have is we have one set of tubes, you could think like a mechanical process, that is creating a vacuum that is sucking water up. And then after it's creating and doing everything to make sugars and everything, we're flowing water back down. But we constantly have a system of up and down pulls, whether it's gravity or a vacuum, that's allowing water to go up and down from the leaves all the way down to the root system, from root system all the way up to the leaves. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is a little activity to once again relate with how a tree works is, and you can do this if you want, or you can stay seated, but you stand kind of straight and put your arms off to the side. If you do so, and then hold your legs straight, and then wiggle your toes. These toes would be your fine root system, okay? Now, if we wiggled our feet, then we would have our main root system, okay? And if we fill our chest and our stomach, then what we have here is mainly our trunk, right? And if we spread our arms out, but keeping a fist, our arms are our branches. So these branches reach out to help reach more sunlight. And then our fingers, as we spread those out, would be our leaves. And as we move them, we're moving them in the wind and everything, but we're getting sunlight, right? And then we can take a great big deep breath and expel that. And then we know that we are producing oxygen, right? And then meantime, what time we're doing all that, we have blood flow or water flow through our xylem and phloem, right? But we have our protective skin, which is our bark. And then we also have new cells producing all the time, just like the cambium layer or the very green little section. If you've ever peeled out a twig or anything, that green section is that green new growth, okay, from the cambium layer. Lastly, I've got a little assignment that you all can do at home that's a little bit fun. So, and I'm going to show you what you can do. Let me share screen for a moment. So what you can do is you can make your own factory and come up with your own idea of how you think a tree ought to work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of what I did. And remember the discussions of trees work like machines and they hold structure, they have tubing, they have different working parts, all working together.
Okay, follow along everyone. So I used a paper clip with a smiley face to represent when my tree was first a sapling or a seed. As it grew structure and heartwood. This heartwood is represented by the pulled strings and fiber, all used in our factory through these pulley systems. So as each string gets pulled in the wind and different weathers and growth and sunlight and different things, they all pull on each other, helping with the structure of the tree. Next, in the xylem stage, I used blue tubing. Blue tubing to represent where the water flows. So remember, it gets transported up through the xylem, right? So it zips up through the tree and up through the branches and the leaves. Next, I used green string to represent the cambium layer. So you can see the cambium layer is where we get green new growth. Then we have the inner bark, just inside the bark where we have phloem. I used flagging to represent the phloem in my factory, where things slide down. It's kind of a slick plastic, so I pictured that the water would slide back down to the root systems, bringing nutrients to the tree. And then where our bark is, I have that represented by rubber bands, showing that it ties everything back in together. So holding the structure in of the tree and protecting everything by holding in tight and protecting our other layers of our tree. So then if we zoom on out, then we can see all the factors of our factory. So we have an inner working manager system where our sapling started. Then we have a bunch of pulley systems. We have lines and hoses, tied strings and slides, and rubber bands, right? Keeping everything structurally in place.
So what we've pretty much done is we've talked throughout class about how a tree has working parts that all have to work together to make a functioning system. And if we can make a healthy environment and more sustainable way of managing our timber, then we have healthier timber. We've also compared that along with how it can be compared to the human body with working parts or a machine with working parts, right? But it's up to us to be sustainable and then look at trees as individuals or in groups as far as a forest or a forest type, and then even on a global scale to see if we're still have healthy trees that are growing properly in the way they're supposed to. But I challenge you to go home, find whatever assortment of items that you can find, just like I did. I just spent an afternoon. I went and I walked into my house and found a bunch of different items, and I put together my own little system. You don't have to have a tree cookie to do this. You can just use a piece of foam board or whatever, but make yourself a tree cookie that kind of grew and had working parts. It's a fun little activity. Any other questions?
Well, I think I need to get clarified on how to count the rings since I had such a bad answer for that. Okay, so I always did think that every ring represented a year, but I think I might have misunderstood you. when you were, did you say that 4 rings is a season or
Oh,
no?
no. So, and it's going to be defined a little bit different on different trees, but it kind of flows in from a winter season than a summer season, right? But so you could pretty much count every winter and you'd be counting rings. But I don't want people to make the mistake of accidentally counting a winter and a summer and a winter and a summer. So you're just counting one main ring around for that 1 year's worth of season and then moving on.
Got it. Eli did good on that. He was really close.
Yeah, you done good.
Thank
Okay,
you.
anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay, well, that ends our session. You got 2 minutes left for my time. So you can exit back and go back into the main room. Thank you very much for attending.
Okay.
Thanks for being with us. That was really awesome, Jesse. Lots of great information.
Good deal.